Good evening, everybody. Good evening. How's everyone doing tonight? Good. My name is Melanie Korn, and I'm the president here at Columbus College of Art and Design. Thank you. I'm the least important person tonight, so don't, save your applause. But I want to just thank you all for being here. I love when Linda reaches out to have an event here for Gramercy Books because I get a chance to see great authors and great conversations, but I also get a chance to welcome a crowd here to campus, some of whom know us well, and many of whom may be first-time visitors to CCAD. So welcome to CCAD. I hope that you all come back often. For those of you who don't know, we are an accredited, independent, nonprofit college of art and design. We've got just under 1,000 students studying a wide variety of visual art and design programs, and they really truly are the engine of Central Ohio's creative economy. And we offer all kinds of opportunities for sort of regular students to come and engage with our community. That might be at our free gallery here in this building, or other events like what's going on tonight, or lots of other classes, community classes for youth and adults. So come be a part of our community again. We always love to have you here. And with that, I would like to introduce Linda Cass, who is journalist, author, and most importantly for tonight, owner and founder of Gramercy Books. Linda.
Thanks so much, Melanie. I just love being here at CCAD. It's our favorite venue, really. We're just thrilled with the Kanzani Auditorium. It's a beautiful, magnificent venue for us. And we are also so thrilled to have all of you here and to have tonight's program, anticipating such a vibrant conversation that features two Central Ohio superstars talking about a groundbreaking book. This evening, we host acclaimed author and story scientist Angus Fletcher and his just-released Primal Intelligence, and James Clear, the #1 New York Times bestselling author of Atomic Habits. And along with CCAD, I do want to thank Denison University and Ohio State University Department of English, both of whom, along with CCAD, helped present tonight's program. And special thanks again to Melanie and to Rochelle Simpson, who runs operations here at CCAD. She worked diligently to make all the facility logistics perfect. Let me just preview the next hour for you. After my introductions, Angus and James, they're going to discuss Primal Intelligence for about 40 minutes. We'll have about 15 minutes for questions and answers that you submitted online for the event. And then finally, Angus is going to sign your copies of Primal Intelligence following the program in the lobby, so you would be going out that door into the lobby and line up that way. Gramercy Books continues to offer weekly author events for the community you enjoy. You should have received a flyer when you came in. It had a bunch of our events. You can also find a list of all of our events on our website, gramercybooksbexley.com. And we even can have you on our newsletter if you want to, learn about all other kinds of things happening at the bookstore. So now, on to tonight's program. Primal Intelligence explores human potential as it considers the many forms of intelligence, the creative spark of Vincent van Gogh, the business acumen of Steve Jobs, the mental resilience of Maya Angelou, the transformative leadership of Abraham Lincoln, and the communications knack of William Shakespeare. Angus Fletcher shares the ways life requires attributes like intuition, imagination, and common sense, where he writes, and I quote, "AI tumbles off its throne. This is how you know that AI is never going to run the world or anything." Primal Intelligence, I guarantee, if you haven't read it yet, is a fascinating book. Angus Fletcher is a professor of story science at Ohio State University's Project Narrative, the world's leading academic think tank for for the study of stories. He has dual degrees in neuroscience and literature, received his PhD from Yale, taught Shakespeare at Stanford, and has published widely on the scientific workings of novels, poetry, film, and theater. He's also the author of Wonderworks, the 25 most powerful inventions in the history of literature. His research has been called life-changing by Brené Brown and mind-blowing by Malcolm Gladwell. It has been endorsed by psychologists, neuroscientists, and doctors, such as Martin Seligman and Antonio Damasio, and has been supported by institutions from the National Sciences Foundation to the Academy of Motion Pictures and Sciences. In 2023, he was awarded the Commendation Medal by the U.S. Army for his groundbreaking research with U.S. Army Special Operations into Primal Intelligence. In conversation with Angus is James Clear, a writer and speaker focused on habits, decision-making, and continuous improvement. Along with authoring #1 New York Times bestseller, Atomic Habits, which has sold over 25 million copies and has been translated into more than 60 languages, James is a regular speaker at Fortune 500 companies, and his work has been featured in places like Time Magazine, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and on CBS This Morning. His work has been praised by thought leaders such as Brené Brown, Adam Grant, Arianna Huffington, Tim Urban, and others. His popular 321 email newsletter is sent out each week to more than 3 million subscribers. So, let's now welcome to the stage Angus Fletcher and James Clear.
Hey everybody. How's it going, squad? We ready to go? Usually I'm getting interviewed, so today will be fun. Hi Angus, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Hopefully my mic's on.
I think so.
Yeah.
You're good.
Yeah. Thanks for doing this, by the way.
Yeah, of course.
I mean,
I just wanted to hear your accent.
well, if you'd like, I can talk in my original accent. Yeah. Those of you who haven't read the book.
Yeah, this is part of the book. He can turn it on and turn it off.
I was one of the things I was outed for with special operations was this fake American accent that I have. So you can find that in the book. Yeah.
Okay, I'm excited. I agreed to do this because each time I talk to Angus, I learn something. So hopefully tonight will be no
I'll do
different.
my best.
Let's start by talking about fear. At one point in the book, you talk about if you're in this moment of fear, you have this moment of fear, and you're kind of fixated on what's right in front of you, that sometimes if you look beyond that, it can open up some possibilities. Can you just unravel that a little bit for me? Talk about what you learned there.
Yeah, so what we know is that fear is the most powerful emotion in the human brain. It's the most ancient emotion in the human brain. You have this thing called the amygdala, which basically sits at the top of your brainstem, and the moment that goes active, it shuts off the entire rest of your brain. And because fear is so enormously powerful, we spend an enormous amount of our time in the modern world trying to figure out how to dissociate from fear or how in some other way to kind of remove fear from our lives. But actually, that's not the right approach, because the reason that fear is in our brain is it's the most ancient part of our intelligence. And the thing that I started to become really fascinated by is how smart people are able to learn from this fear response. And so basically, the simple version of this is that what fear is telling your brain is that you don't have a plan. And the reason that fear is telling your brain this is because the most important thing from your brain's perspective is having a plan. Your brain has a bias to action, it always wants to be doing something. That's how your brain grows, that's how it influences your environment. And so when you feel scared, your brain is saying, you don't have that plan right now. And so the question becomes, why is that the emotion that the human brain evolved when it doesn't have a plan? Why didn't it evolve, say, curiosity or something like that? Why would you not have a plan? Does your brain something like, let me explore my environment? Well, the answer is that fear makes you open to influence. And you've probably felt this when you get scared. All of a sudden, other people's ideas start sounding better. Start hiring some consultants, maybe, to come into your company, tell you what to do. Fear makes your brain susceptible because that's a fast way to get a plan, is to steal it from somebody else. This is why we have herd behavior. This is why my students, when they basically get towards graduation, all of a sudden start listening to their parents. Like, oh, maybe mom and dad have some good ideas about what I should do in my future, right? So fear is this fast way of getting a plan from your environment, from somebody else. But the thing is, ultimately, that plan is not your plan. And the more that you listen to other people's plans, the more their story becomes your story, and the more you lose your own way. And so the first thing I really talk about in the book that I really emphasize is when you start to feel scared, realize that's your brain saying, I don't have confidence in my plan. Pause in that moment, block out other people, go back to your own life story. Think about those moments in your own past that got you where you are, and then use those to start to roll your own plan forward.
Yeah. Okay, before we get too far, let's just do a summary of primal intelligence, what it is. In the book, you outline these 4, what would you call them, elements, factors.
Yeah.
So maybe unpack those 4 from a high level so that everybody's on the same page.
Okay, so the 4 things I talk about are intuition, emotion, imagination, and common sense. And for most of my career, really what I was known for is kind of an expert on imagination. But the other ones came as a result of working with these teams over the last 4 years. Because what imagination does is it helps you grow and shape your plans. As everybody sort of talked about, a plan is the thing that you need in life to influence your environment. And so the more that you have imagination, the more you're able to grow new and original and different and interesting plans. But even
Sorry,
though
not to interrupt, but just
Yeah.
when you say a plan, you're talking about a little bit differently than like somebody who sits down to write a business plan.
That's right. I am
So,
talking about
right.
a little
So
bit
like
later.
what? Maybe just
Yeah, okay, I'll unpack that, because I'm kind of weird, right? It's basically what you're saying, and I have a different view of things, right? And so basically, I'm a story scientist, and one of the questions is, what is the story scientist doing talking about plans? And the answer is that another word for a plan is a plot. Another word for a plot is a story.
Yeah.
And so what I think a plan is it's a story of the future. And one of the things that we know when we look in the brains of leaders is the same parts of their brain go active as in the brains of screenwriters and storytellers. Because what they're doing is they're imagining a story of the future, something that hasn't happened before. And probably all of you have had this experience in your own life at some point. You've just seen a possible narrative of the future. You said, this could be my story. And then success comes from making it real. So a plan is a story. That's what I think of it is anyway. And that comes from imagination. We know that children are very imaginative. That's why they're always able to come up with all sorts of plans for disrupting your day. If you've ever met a child, they're constantly going around, we should do this instead, we should do this other thing, right? No, 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 no. We've got an agenda. So that's what imagination is. But imagination alone isn't enough to be an effective planner. And first of all, that's because we know that some people are able to spot opportunities, which are the starting points of plans, better than other people. And those opportunities come from intuition. Intuition is spotting new things in the world that allow you to spark plans. The first thing is intuition sparks plans, imagination grows them. Then there's a question of what plan is right for what time? So one of the things about me is I have zero common sense. I actually have negative common sense. It turns out common sense is the ability to match your plan to your environment. So if you're a very imaginative person, you're always coming up with lots of plans, and then your life is a disaster, right? You're a disaster because you always go with the plan that you find most interesting. You're like, this plan is really interesting, I should go with it, right? And it's like, no, that's not right. You don't want to go with the plan that's most interesting, you want to go with the plan that's most appropriate for the moment. That's common sense. Common sense helps you match your plan to your environment. And then the final thing, of course, is that all of us are individuals who are living our own stories. And so we don't just want to be coming up with great plans that are effective, we want to be coming up with the right plans for us. What's the right plan for me? What's kind of my story? And that's where emotion comes in. Your emotions really help you identify what plans are right for you, because a lot of times if you're a creative person, you can come up with all sorts of interesting things, but that's not your life. You realize that's not your life. And so emotion is that guide that helps you realize not just what's the right plan for the time, but what's the right plan for you.
Okay, so we have intuition, imagination, emotion, and common sense. These 4 factors that make up this primal sort of brain, this primal intelligence that we have. We will talk about this, and you mentioned in the book about how primal intelligence does these things that AI cannot. If we just invert that for a second, I like to, before we unpack anything, I like to try to create the boundary of what are the limitations of this idea? When do you feel like primal intelligence doesn't work, or what do you think it doesn't do well? Where are the boundaries at?
So the important thing about primal intelligence is that it's a low information system. So it's really good in environments where there's not a lot of information. And those environments are new environments, which is to say environments that are changing rapidly, that are volatile. And that's because our brain evolved in those kinds of environments. environments where there wasn't a lot of information, where things were changing, competitive environments where your competitors kind of destroying the way you're doing. So that's what Primal Intelligence is good for. Primal Intelligence is not good for environments that are stable, that are transparent, where there's a lot of data, a lot of information. So your Primal Intelligence is not very good at math. It's not very good at a warehouse. If you ever notice as a human being, you can follow an interesting story for hours, but the moment someone starts giving you huge amounts of data, immediately you can't handle it. Whereas a computer can just handle data all day. So any environment where there's a lot of stable data.
Which is interesting because that is what AI can be very good at. Some of the first things it did was, hey, it'll code for you. You know, it can give it whatever math problem you want. It'll work on it all day long. Like it can churn that stuff out instantly.
Yeah. And so the point of the book is not that AI is bad or evil or has no value or is unintelligent. The point of it is it's just totally different from human intelligence, and that's in fact why it is valuable. But the problem that we're seeing now today is this kind of rhetoric that somehow AI is going to replace human intelligence and somehow it's going to be running the world. And one of the points I just want to make in the book is that's not going to happen unless somehow everything in the world becomes totally stable and transparent. And that's only going to happen if there's no humans, because humans are a source of chaos. So it's possible that AI could eliminate us and take over and rule over this unchanging world. But as long as there's people, there's going to be primal.
Yeah. You have this story in the book where you talk about going to a museum and the docent's basically trying to convince you that colors are not a certain color.
Yeah,
Was this kind of an absurd experience for you? Like, the background, there's this interesting little anecdote about Vincent van Gogh. And I did not know this. I know RGB as the color red, green, blue from Photoshop. Yes. But Van Gogh essentially discovered the RGB, this connection between like red and cyan or green and, you know, what is green tied to? Blue and yellow and green and
purple.
And purple. And use those color combinations, often green and purple in Van Gogh's paintings or things like that. And then famously, Starry Night is blue and yellow. And it's the contrast between these colors that's very dynamic and it makes the painting pop. And you went to see, did you see the actual Starry Night? Or
well, this actually occurred during COVID when I called the Van Gogh Museum and this docent was on the phone. So basically the big story here is that what I'm talking about in this chapter is how is it that Van Gogh revolutionized art? Like what was it that was so revolutionary about Van Gogh? And everyone who's looked at Van Gogh knows that I think the most extraordinary thing is the color. The colors are so extraordinary, particularly the color combinations are so extraordinary. And so I was like, oh, how did he come up with these color combinations? And it turns out that Van Gogh himself was obsessed with color. And in the 19th century, they had this theory of color, that there were these complementary colors, which really heightened each other. And these were based on a logical color wheel known as the red, yellow, blue wheel. And it said that the most powerful color contrasts were things like green and red together, for example. That was
the idea is that red looks more red when it's next to green. It's the combination pulls out, the strengthens the two.
More themselves, right? You know, and so so the original version is that blue and orange are these sort of poppy colors, and that red and green are these poppy colors, and that's why Freddy Krueger's sweater, if you guys have ever seen Nightmare on Elm Street, is red and green, because someone read this 19th century theory of color and was like, oh, that'll be the most shocking thing. So anyway, Van Gogh read all this, but then as he was looking out at the world, he was like, you know what, actually, yeah, blue and orange kind of elevate each other, but it's really blue and yellow that elevate each other the most. And from this insight, which we get Starry Night, which is this beautiful painting many of you are probably familiar with, which has like the blue sky and the yellow stars in it, he then proceeded to completely reinvent the color wheel. And he gave us the red, green, blue color wheel, which now powers all of these, you know, all of our TV devices and everything like that. But he was so far ahead of his time, as I point out in the book, that art theory still hasn't caught up yet. And you often in art school get taught the other color wheel. And in fact, when I called the Van Gogh Museum to just talk with them about things, they informed me that I was in fact wrong about Van Gogh's insight. And they said, please read this book, which I read, which informed me that, you know, it was in fact the older color thing that he'd overturned, and that I was misseeing Starry Night, and in fact, the stars in it were orange, or possibly the sky was purple, which I think if you look at it, you'll discover is not the case. And this is just one of these many instances in which, you know, that example's on the chapter of intuition. And the whole point about intuition is that you see the thing that nobody else sees, because everyone else is caught seeing the pattern. And I think all of us have had this experience in our life for something, like where we're an expert, where we see something that other people don't see it. And the moment you see it, you run to the most important people in your life, you say, I've seen this thing, and they go, you're nuts, right? That's not the case. And then you spend all this time trying to convince you out of it, right? And I felt, you know, here I am talking to the Van Gogh Museum, and they're telling me that I'm actually wrong about Van Gogh, and I'm like, oh my God, but I can't be wrong, are my eyes wrong, and so on and so forth. And so if any of you ever had that feeling, that's for you. And I think that also helps you know how Van Gogh himself felt. Because he was painting all these paintings, these incredible paintings, and of course he dies alone essentially in a cornfield, having sold I think maybe one painting his entire life, because his intuition was so far ahead that no one else had caught up yet.
Van Gogh is actually a brilliant writer, too. He has some incredible passages. Probably could have made a great career as a writer. Okay, there's one thing that I have written about before that you also touch on in this book, and so I want to expand on that a little bit. I really like this idea of there being multiple pathways to a successful outcome. I think whenever one of the things that I want to teach my kids is that there is not one version of living a happy life or one version of having a successful life. There are many ways to do it. And if you get fixated on one version because you need a label, I have to be a doctor, I have to be a professor, I have to whatever, then you collapse all these other future potential paths that could be, very successful. You also talk about this idea of there being multiple pathways to a successful outcome. I came across this example one time where it says, imagine you have two die and you're going to roll them across the table. And they can come up anywhere between 1 and 6. If you combine these two numbers, if you want to get like a 12, for example, well, they both have to come up 6. And so the odds of rolling that are only like 2%. But if you want to get, say, a 7, well, there's a bunch of ways to do it. You can get, a 5 and a 2, a 6 and a 1, 4 and 3. Like there are lots of combinations. And so you're 8 times more likely to roll a 7 than to roll a 12. And the way that I think about that is, well, let's try to find areas of life where there are multiple pathways to a successful outcome. There are multiple pathways to getting a 7, and so your odds of success increase quite a bit. There's only one pathway to get a 12, and so you kind of put yourself in a tough spot by making that your target. Tell me a little bit more about your thoughts on having multiple pathways and how you kind of see that playing out.
First of all, the reason you think that is because you have high common sense. And, common sense is focusing on things that have a high likelihood of success. And as you'll know if you read the book, I have actually negative common sense. I was evaluated by United States Army Special Operations. And so, of course, the moment I'm thinking about what you're saying is I'm thinking, I want to roll a 12. So if you're the person in the room who wants to roll a 12, you're with me on the low common sense end, and you probably need to get over with James on the 7 end. But to your point, what we know is that when you look inside people's heads, they have a story, which is their life story. And that story broadly has a past and a future. And when you look at people who possess what we call anti-fragility, so anti-fragility is the ability to get wiser and stronger when life challenges you. So when we look at people who over time grow and develop, we know that their life story in general has an integrated past, so they have a strong sense that everything that's happened in their life fits together, but they have a branching, open future, so they're able to imagine all these different pathways. And what's fascinating is when you look at children about the age of 4, they have this integrated past and branching future. And when you look at most adults, it's the opposite. Actually. And particularly going through our school system, their future starts to narrow. So a lot of my students, when I talk to them, like, to your point, I've got to go to Harvard Law School. I've got to do this one thing, right? And they also have this, what we call disaggregated past. So they think of themselves as many people, and they're uncertain kind of who they are in any situation. And what I find fascinating is that when I work with soldiers, that life structure of the tight future and the disaggregated past, that's the same shape that you get in post-traumatic stress. It's the exact same shape. So we're essentially kind of creating a world now where most of our kids have that. And to your point, what we want to do is we want to encourage people to have that branching sense of opportunity. And also we want them to look for places where there is that possibility, where there is that opportunity.
In the book, you describe it like a trident, right? Your past is this single solid collected line, and then you also have this branching future.
That's exactly right.
How do you solidify your past if you feel disaggregated now?
How do you do that, right? Yeah, so the first thing is to realize that there's 2 main sources of disaggregation, and those are shame and grief. So if you start looking over your past and you start feeling a strong sense of shame or a strong sense of grief, that's telling you that there's a break, there's a fracture in your life. And the shame comes from the sense that you're 2 people, and the grief comes from the sense that you're living in 2 different worlds. And so you want to review those moments of your past, and then start to heal them. And how do you heal them? Well, the way you heal grief is you start to remind yourself of moments of wonder. Moments when life surprised you in a positive way. And all of us have those moments, those kinds of just surprising, serendipitous times. And if you can't think of a big one, it could just be something simple, like nature. You just went out in nature and you're like, wow, this is beautiful. Your kids maybe surprise you with something outside yourself. The more you think about that moment and then use it to revisit the grief in your life, the more that grief will start to integrate, and you'll start to develop wisdom from it. With shame, how do you integrate shame? You think back to a moment when you surprised yourself, when you did something you didn't think you could do. You hold on to that moment, and then you start to integrate the shame. You start to see it come together. And we've done this with thousands and thousands of veterans and other people who have experienced. And one of the key things I often say to people is when people experience shame or grief in the modern world, they associate that with trauma, and then they say that it's bad and I don't want to think about it. But actually the shame and the grief are not trauma. They're made by your brain in response to something. Shame and grief are made by your brain, and your brain made them because it knows there's wisdom there. So we always say to people, be grateful for shame and grief. Be grateful because that's a moment for real learning. And we find that people have that growth when they're able to go back to those moments in the ways that I talked about.
That alone is a reframing of it, right? Being grateful for it.
Yes,
rather than,
100%. Yeah.
Would you, sometimes I think about your work as being how to teach resilience, how to teach perseverance. Do you like that definition, or would you prefer to describe it?
No, I'm totally open to that. I'm actually totally open to being defined in any way that is helpful to people. So I'm very...
Well, if you were going to give someone an exercise to do to become more resilient, mentally resilient, where would you start?
So the two things that we generally talk about are true optimism and plan or not the plan. And with true optimism, this comes from a kind of interesting discovery we made, which we call the optimism paradox. And the optimism paradox is that many people who self-report as being optimistic are in fact very emotionally fragile, and their optimism cracks very quickly. And the bigger version of this paradox is the fact that even though we know that optimism really helps you out in life, most people are inclined to be negative. And this is weird, because if there's a huge advantage to being optimistic, why wouldn't over time our brain have evolved just to be naturally optimistic? And it turns out the reason is that we're doing it wrong in the modern world. And in the modern world, what we're taught is that optimism is visualizing success, essentially. We're taught that to be optimistic is to look into the future and just really imagine really strongly that good things are going to happen. And this comes from a kind of a mystic tradition, New Thought in the 19th century. There's a lot of other kind of self-help mantras which kind of focus on just visualize success, visualize success. What we actually find is that when you focus on believing that something will happen, when it doesn't happen, your brain catastrophically loses faith. It's like, oh, you know what? I believed that it would happen, and it didn't happen. Now I'm going to give up. And so you see people who are really focused on kind of visualizing success. It's really fragile. So we started to look at people who have really high optimism. And what we found is that instead of looking to the future, they actually looked to the past. And particularly, they looked to moments when surprising things happened in a good way. And they're like, whoa, a kind of surprising outcome happened. And what that makes their brain think is not that things will work out, but things have worked out in the past so they could work out in the future. And this could happen is much stronger than this will happen, because even if it doesn't happen, right?
Sure.
The brain's like, it didn't happen that time, but it could happen again. And so we spent a lot of time to help people develop resilience, having them focus back on these surprising kind of positive moments. So that's one example of the kind of optimism.
I heard about it reminds me of this. I heard about this exercise one time. Take a sheet of paper, divide it in two halves. On one half, you're going to write the story of your last year. And the only rule for this game is that everything you write has to be factual. So on the one half, you're going to write down the story of your last year, but it's going to be the negative version. It's going to be all the negative things that happen, the worst factual case that you can make. On the other half, it's going to be the best factual case that you can make, so it's all the positive things. And you look at those two sides and you say, neither one of these contains lies, but which story are you emphasizing? And so, I don't know, something about what you said there.
No, that's outstanding. And one of the things I like about that is what you're focusing on there is your true story. So what I find with a lot of people is they want to get away from their own story. This is the origin of a lot of sort of inspirational movies. Is you go to the movie and you're like, I want to imagine myself as being that person, Or you read a self-help book, or you read an inspirational memoir, and you're like, oh, I want to be this other person. And as a result, you start trying to convince your brain that it's somebody else, And do you think your brain is going to believe that it's somebody else? No, it's not. The moment that something wrong starts to happen, your brain's like, I knew it, I'm the failure, I'm not this inspirational person who climbed Mount Everest, I'm me and I'm a loser, And what that exercise does, right, when you write down your true story, is it makes you be like, this is who I am. And my story, and it helps you own that story, and it helps you realize, yes, there are negative things, but there are also these positive things, and which parts am I going to lean into?
I played baseball when I was younger, and after each season, I would sit on the back porch with my dad, and we would talk about all the wins from that season, the things that I got better at, the skills I built, the good plays or good games I had. And I was never the best player on any of my teams, but I remember at one point where he said, well, you just stick with it long enough, like you'll see each year guys drop off. And I ended up playing all the way through college, and a lot of it was just because guys dropped off, and I think a big part of why I loved it and stuck with it is because I always was emphasizing the parts about it that were great. You know, like each season ended and you emphasize the positive parts, that optimism carries you through.
You had a good dad.
Yeah,
You know,
I
and
did.
that's a good exercise to do with your kids. And I would encourage you all to do that with your kids, because one of the extraordinary things about kids, I see this with my own kids, is they do something really awesome, and then they're just on to the next thing. And you're like, no, that was really cool what you did. And my kids will always say this, and I don't know if your kids say this, but they're always like, oh no, that was easy. Anytime my kids do anything that's like really hard, like, oh, that was easy. And they think it's easy because they did it. I'm like, that wasn't easy. That was actually really hard. Like, you couldn't have done that 15 minutes before you did it. You got something. But going back and reflecting on those moments of victory, strengthening that narrative in your brain, and it's true. So, you know, I spend a lot of time in Hollywood, and people often ask me, you know, how is it that people are successful in Hollywood? And I say, really, 95% of it is not quitting. Because you've probably noticed that Hollywood movies aren't always that great. and that's because, right, those are the writers that just hang in there. And a lot of hanging in there is going back and reflecting, and that gives you that durability.
Well, I like when I read books, I like trying to identify a moment where I'm like, ooh, that's good, I want to steal that. And so the one thing that I read in this that really stood out to me in that way was the exercise that you have at the end of the intuition section about the who, when, why, not why, who, when, how, what. Basically, like the majority of the questions that you're asking are in that vein. Take what I just said and explain it in a way that they can all understand it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you want, do you want me to talk about the marriage counseling thing in this thing?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll tell you kind of like a little fun story that will lead into that. So as some of you guys know when you read the book, I work with special operations, and I got this phone call a couple years ago, and at the other end of the phone, the person goes, hey Angus, this is Tom. And the moment I hear that someone is Tom, I immediately know that they're a special operator, because for some reason all the special operators are called Tom. At first I thought this was just like their code name, you know, but it turns out that actually if you're named Tom, you're much more likely to become a special operator. And so Tom is like, Angus. I'm like, yes, Tom. He's like, we're having some trouble with our wives. And then there was like a long pause. He's like, or maybe our wives are having trouble with us. It's unclear with the origin of the problem. But anyway, you know, and he starts telling me that this unit, this classified unit, has a divorce rate of over 90%. And I was like, whoa, that's not good. And he's like, that's right, Angus. That's why we want you to come and do marriage counseling for us. And I was like, what? You want me to come and do marriage counseling for you? Yeah, he's like, that's right. We want you to come and do marriage counseling for us. And, you know, this seemed bizarre to me. It'll probably seem bizarre to you because, trust me, I do not have a perfect marriage. You know, my wife will be happy to tell you all of my faults and various failings. But the thing about working with these units is once they develop this trust with you, you're the only person they trust. And so literally I could get a call, you know, tomorrow and they'd be like, Angus, you do open heart surgery. You know, we need you to do your open heart surgery, right? So anyway, so they're like, you know, we want you to come out and do this marriage counseling. And, you know, I didn't want to say no. So I get on this plane, go to this plane, fly out to Fort Bragg. I get out there, and the next thing I know is I find myself in a field, literally with 100 operators and their spouses. And then Tom comes up to me and he's like, these people are all about to get divorced, Angus. And I was like, but you're gonna fix this problem, right? And I was like, oh my goodness, like, what am I gonna do? And, you know, I'll cut to the ending of the story is we actually kind of did solve a big part of the problem, and I'll kind of share how. And the way that we solved it is not any kind of particular genius of my own, but what I had learned from special operators was this communication technique that they developed. And the purpose of this technique, because they're operators, isn't really to communicate, it's actually to extract information from the other person. And what's the best way to extract information from the other person? Well, it turns out what stops you from learning about somebody else is your mind forms a judgment. And you know that you form that judgment because you stop being curious. And that can be you either get bored of the conversation, or maybe it's then you want to start talking and sharing. Because you're like, oh, I know exactly how you feel, right? We're exactly the same person. Let me write my life story over your life story, right? So you all know that moment when you're having a conversation where you just want to start talking, or you're bored and you want to get out of the room, and that's because your brain has made a judgment. So the question is how do you avoid making that judgment? And in your brain, what a judgment is it's answering the question why. When you feel like you know why the person is the way that they are, your brain has arrived at the judgment. So you've got to stop jumping to why. You've got to delay why. And the way that you delay why is you ask all the other questions that if you're a trained journalist, you know to ask, which are who, what, when, where, how. You ask those questions. So if you practice asking those conversations the next time you're talking to someone, if they're like, oh, I just went bicycling. You're like, I know why you went bicycling. No, don't do that. Say, where'd you go bicycling? When was the first time you went bicycling? What does your bicycle look like? Who did you meet when you were bicycling? See what I mean? You start asking these questions, and the more you ask these questions, something will come up which surprises you. And that surprise is an indication that you don't have a why for it. Start focusing on that surprise, leaning into that surprise. So anyway, this is something I learned from the...
I thought the other interesting part of that was that you're not allowed to assign some kind of value judgment to it, or to even say, oh, I also went bicycling.
That's right.
You need to follow it up with another question. And if you do that 3, 4, 5 times in a row, when, where, why did you do, if you do those, all of a sudden you've developed a really deep rapport with somebody.
You've developed a rapport.
You've gotten way deeper than you typically do in a conversation, because usually you ask a question or two and then you're either feeling like, oh, I should affirm that, or find out the reason for it.
Exactly. No, but instead you're exploring and you're discovering it. If you watch the way that someone who's a genuine curious person will operate, is they won't ask why, right? They will ask all these other questions. And so anyway, what we did in the field with all the operators was I had them run this exercise with their wives. And I had them say, look, the reason you're having a bad time in your marriage right now is you think you know your spouse better than you do. You've lost the sense of mystery, right? You're just always jumping to a judgment. And that judgment is then preceded by you becoming impatient, you telling them what they should be doing instead, so on and so forth. Try running this exercise. And in my mind, I thought this would kind of like buy me some time, to just kind of get going. But they talk for hours, and they come up to me afterwards like, Angus, that was great, that was totally amazing, And since then, we've run versions of this exercise again and again and again. We do a lot of these marriage retreats, actually, with operators. And I would encourage you to try that not just with your partner, but with anyone if you're having a hard time with that relationship. Just try running this. You don't have to run it too mechanically, but just start to notice, when am I starting to jump to that judgment? When am I starting to jump to that why? Can I start to lean into these other questions and surface things that surprise me? And you just find, to your point, James, it will really deepen your relationships.
I really liked that exercise in the book. I thought it was great. Okay, I have some questions from the audience. Before we get to those, I want to make sure I don't miss this chance to talk about anger and anxiety, especially in kids. I don't know. Can you unpack that a little bit more, the work that you've been doing there and what you've learned?
Yeah, so this is work we've been fortunate to do in this area in the Worthington school community, and we've talked a little bit with Bexley as well about doing it there, and we're open to doing it anywhere else. But basically the main thing here is that we know kids are just experiencing these increasing rates of anger and anxiety in school, and it's really becoming a catastrophe, frankly. And what is going on? Why are kids feeling anger and anxiety? Well, the reason is they're having a threat response. That's what the origin is of anger and anxiety in your brain. It's a threat response. And so why is this happening? We have great teachers, we've got great kids, we've got great schools. Why are they having these threat responses? Well, the first reason that they're having a threat response is because the way school works now is it's focused on standardized testing. And the way that standardized tests operate is there's a right and a wrong answer. And so essentially, the more kids are in this environment, the more they're taught there's an answer and the system has it. And so you're constantly feeling like, I've got to please the system by coming up with the answer that the system wants. And so you're constantly in this state of stress and anxiety because you're decentered. The second thing is because school is only focused on these standardized tests, it's not focused on helping kids answer their own problems, helping empower them.
I thought that was interesting too. At some point in the book, I think you say standardized test scores have increased, but the ability to solve life problems has decreased.
Yeah.
It's like, the kids now are doing great on all the tests, and they also don't know what to do day to day.
Yeah, and they're doing worse and worse at life. Yeah, and this is something that actually came up when I started working with the Army. I mean, people often why did you start working with the Army? Because I'm not an Army guy. I mean, I've never had a background with the Army. And the reason is because the Army noticed this problem, which is that, they were trying to get young people to come into the Army, and they noticed that these kids were better and better at math and worse at life. And the Army was like, how do we solve this problem? And so what we basically started to do is we started to go into schools and we started to say, hey, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with standardized tests, there's nothing wrong with math, there's nothing wrong with any of this kind of stuff. That's fine. But you also have to make room for these other things that center the students. And first of all, give them problems that are open-ended, that there isn't a right answer to. And give them problems that the teacher doesn't know the answer to. Because the moment that the student feels that the teacher knows the answer, the student starts to get anxious, look at the teacher, defer to authority, this kind of stuff. Put the teacher in the situation of not having a better answer than the student does. How do you do that? Well, one thing you can do that's simple is just ask the student what problems they're having in their own life. And if you do this, you'll notice, because I've done a lot of teachers will freak out. Because, the first thing is to have like a third grader, and the third grader will be like, my problem is that my parents shout at each other, and I'm afraid they're going to get a divorce. And the teacher's like, oh my God, like, how do I deal with that? You know what I mean? Or, my problem is my older brother is like doing this, that, the other thing. And the teacher's like, oh my God. And the point is, as a teacher, you don't have to have the answer. You just have to have a method for helping the kid make a plan. And the way that we coach this is we say to the kid, okay, well, what's a plan that you think might work in this situation? When your parents are arguing, what's a plan? What's something you could do? And then the kids will come up with a plan. We do a bunch of training to help them do it, but they come up with a plan. And then the moment the kid comes up with a plan, we do this really, really mean thing, which is we say to the kid, you know what, that's a great plan, but it didn't work. It didn't work. And the first time you tell a kid this, they freak out, because like, oh my goodness, my plan didn't work, I better give up. And we're like, but that's okay, right? Because you came up with that plan, it means that you're a planner. And a planner is someone who can come up with more plans. So what's your next plan? And the more we practice having them come up with more plans, we just see this spike in self-efficacy and resilience. And this is the kind of thing you don't need to spend a ton of time in school doing, but even a little bit of this work in school means that kids are able to take all the good stuff that they do learn in school and translate it to their outside life.
It's great. It reminds me of, sometimes I like to imagine this balance between optimism and pessimism. So I say like optimism early. In the beginning, you're trying to brainstorm lots of options. You don't want to be your own bottleneck. You don't want to talk yourself out of things. Like, let's just lay everything out on the table. So optimism early. Then in the middle, it's actually very helpful to be pessimistic. This is kind of what you said, where, oh, you had a plan and then it didn't work. Yep. So this question of, if it fails, where does it fail? It's a very helpful question to ask. You try to troubleshoot your own plan that you just came up with. But then it's time for optimism again, because we need to take action and try to implement something in the real world. And so you need to have enough trust that you're going to be able to make it work. So optimism early, pessimism in the middle, optimism late. And you just kind of oscillate back and forth between those things. And what you realize is that, yeah, I can come up with more plans, and I can shoot holes in them and try to figure out a way to do it better and take some action, and then we can do it all over again. Yeah,
what I love about that is the middle part. The pessimism is actually the true optimism. Because you're optimistic, right? That if you're negative, you'll still come out the other side with an answer. So I think there's a kind of like underlying.
It's an interesting frame. True optimism is the belief that you can overcome the failures.
Yeah, 100%. I do believe that, and I think when you find people that are sustainably optimistic, they embrace challenges and hard times, and they embrace the negative in life because they actually see the positive is out.
Before I take some of these questions. I heard a quote one time, something to the effect of, one of the central problems with life is that we have Paleolithic minds, Paleolithic biology, and godlike technology. And so we live in this modern world where the modern world is very weird in lots of ways. For most of human history, if you wanted to consume calories, you had to expend calories to get them. At a minimum, you had to forage in the berry bush or kill an antelope on the savannah or something. Even 50 years ago, you had to at least walk around the grocery store. Now you can just tap your thumb and it'll show up at your doorstep. And so, I'm just curious to get your take on, the book is called Primal Intelligence, and we cannot get around our Paleolithic hardware. But we do live in this weird, godlike technology of the modern society. So what is that?
I would say
questions does that raise for you?
A godlike society.
Okay.
I would say that if we lived in a godlike society, we'd be having a lot less problems than we're having. And I think that the effect of our modern society is to make us feel that we have more power than we actually do.
Maybe godlike's the wrong phrase, but so much of our time is spent looking at screens.
Yes.
So much of our time is spent doing things in a digital world. People say, oh, what about when Neuralink will implant chips and you all live in the cloud? I'm like, how much of your identity do you assign to your digital presence now? Yes. If somebody attacks your Twitter profile, you feel like it's you. Yes. You don't think it's somebody else. Yes. So we're already, 20% digital. We already are somewhat robotic.
Yes.
I'm just curious to hear your take on that.
Well, I think the main thing I think about when I think about a digital environment is I think it's a frictionless space. The whole point of why it makes you feel like a god, and this is kind of Steve Jobs' big insight when he created the mouse. The whole idea behind the mouse is that you no longer have to think about typing, right? It's just an intuitive connection where literally my hand is pointing at the screen, and so much of our modern technology is designed to make it feel like it's intuitive, and so it eliminates the sense of friction. And also, along with eliminating that physical thing, is the sense that it's faster now. So you don't have to wait, right? So the friction is going away. The problem is that life is about friction. And the reason is because humans are different. And so just right, in terms of us even wrangling this question between the two of us, right, there's friction between our perspectives, right? And we've got to listen to the other person and adjust our perspective and communicate and so on and so forth, right? And the more you live in these digital environments, the more irritated you get with human environments, And therefore, the more short-tempered you get, the more that you judge other people. There's all this stuff online now, which is basically about diagnosing other people's problems and like identifying when someone's a narcissist and they're part of the dark triad and this kind of stuff. Like, everything in my life is bringing me down, and all this kind of stuff. And because they don't act like my digital avatar. And I think the thing that we've lost is the sense that actually friction is good, because friction causes conflict. Conflict is the source of what? Story. Every story starts with a conflict. And story is also the source of change, growth, and all these kinds of things. And so the thing that I think is, digital environments are good, and it's good to have some things be frictionless.
Yeah.
But you never want to let go of what we're sort of calling the primeval, which is that sense of you impacting life and life being different from you. Because the fact that something is different from you means that there's more, and that more is the space into which you grow and discover.
Reminds me, like, hey, can you help me with this? Not right now, honey.
That's
Somebody
right,
on the internet is wrong.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's right. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. A couple audience questions here. Can you speak to how primal intelligence can be used to create more peace and relaxation?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not sure that I think of primal intelligence as something that's there to create peace and relaxation. I think of primal intelligence as something that's there essentially to make you feel that whatever happens, you can handle it. And to that extent, it does create a sense of I don't have to be anxious, I don't have to be stressed, because I know whatever occurs, I can deal with it. But one of the things I really try and emphasize in the book is that anxiety is not only normal, it's healthy. Anxiety evolved in your brain to help you measure how volatile the present is. That's why anxiety is there. That's why sometimes you get a tingly spider sense that something's wrong, because things are changing around you. If you didn't have that anxiety, if you were just tuned out all the time, then when something bad happened, you wouldn't be able to respond to it. So one of the things that I feel like is, going back to what we were talking about with gratitude, is actually having a little more gratitude for stress, a little more gratitude for anxiety, realizing that we have those things because they're there to keep us in contact with reality, and reality can be changing. And I think sometimes our obsession with sort of living a totally stress-free, there's no stress when you're dead, right? Right? That's why it's called peace, right? Peace everlasting, right? And I think part of the deal with life is like, it's meant to be a little challenging.
Explain, you've defined common sense as knowing what you don't know.
Yeah.
So that can be tied to taking these risks whenever you face this moment of uncertainty. Maybe explain what you mean by that. Explain this kind of how common sense is utilized in these moments of uncertainty.
Yeah, so obviously asking me to explain common sense is dangerous because, as I confess in the book, I have negative common sense. But essentially, common sense is an awareness of the limits of your understanding. That's really what common sense is. And the reason that common sense evolved is, first of all, to keep you in a safe space, right? When you realize, okay, I'm going outside. But also to make you realize when you're outside your zone of confidence, because you're forced to go there, you have to take risks. You have to take risks. That's common sense, because things are changing, so you have to change as well. And so common sense essentially works in the brain by helping you identify when you don't know. And the reason that's important is when you don't know, that's a signal to you, it's time for me to change. It's a time for me to evolve. It's a time for me to grow. And when you do know, it's time for you to take the plan off the shelf. And this comes up and is important because computers can't know when they don't know. This is one of the real problems with computers, because computers, to them, their existing data set is reality. This is why, if you're wondering why ChatGPT is always like very over.
Yeah, it kind of just BS's stuff.
Right, exactly.
I'll ask it, I'll be like, imagine you're a trained professor at Harvard on productivity and give me, 5 novel insights about how to be more productive. And it'll just like tell me 5 things from Atomic Habits.
That's right.
I'm like,
that is probably pretty common sense.
Yeah.
As far as computers go.
I wanted new stuff. All right, there are multiple questions about AI, actually. Some people want to push back a little bit on your AI take. So I think one of these articles in the Wall Street Journal and so on are saying that, if you're trying to find a job and it's not in artificial intelligence, it's kind of a tough time right now. I don't know if that's universally true, but apparently the Wall Street Journal says it is. Obviously, AI is critical for the future of technology and for lots of these jobs. So how does Primal Intelligence help us in that uncertain world? The other question is, you say AI is at best half intelligent, that it doesn't have common sense, imagination, emotion, et cetera. But everyone in Silicon Valley is all in on AI and says that it's creating a transformational change that human minds have rarely seen throughout history.
Yeah.
So
Silicon Valley is obviously a benevolent institution, which
Right,
is still to benefit humanity and not inflate its
point,
stock price.
counterpoint
Yes.
is,
Yeah, so look, we're at peak AI right now. So I know we're all inundated with it, but you're going to see this recede. We've had these AI peaks and valleys before.
this is interesting. Because I kind of feel like, I'm not all in on AI or anything, but I do think this is probably the worst that the technology will be. Like, don't you think it'll get better from here? But you saying that it's at the peak makes me think like,
How could it
or you just
possibly
feel
get
like the
better?
hype cycle is
Right.
maximized?
Okay, so let's be clear about what we mean by AI. This could take us years. But
Yeah,
like,
sure.
If by AI we mean what an engineer would mean by AI, which is a lot of these machine learning technologies which have existed for decades, which are constantly being refined in industry-specific applications, then yeah, that AI is going to continue to improve. If what we mean is these chatbots, these large language models, they are already at their maximum ability. You can see this through the release of Chat.
So you
5.
don't think ChatGPT will give me meaningfully better answers 5 years from now than it does
Well,
today?
how could it? Because it's already got all the data. I mean, it's already scoured the entire internet. There's no way for these things to get smarter. Once you understand what these systems are doing is they're taking all this data and then they're just applying different weights to it. And so you can tweak and tune them, but the more you tweak and tune them, what you're essentially doing is you're increasing or decreasing the randomness. And what that means is that they're either more likely to regurgitate stuff that's already existed, or when they don't have the answer, make up something that could possibly be the case because it uses new words. But there's no way for it to improve fundamentally.
What I want it to do, which I have had trouble getting it to do, is creativity is like the synthesis of two previously disconnected ideas. It's the ability to combine things in an interesting or novel way. And I want it to do that. And if I give it very specific bounds, if I say, give me an example about creativity that relates to scuba diving, it can do that. It can spit out stuff. Now, it may not be that great, but it can make the connection. But if I don't give it tight bounds, then it's not really capable of making these interesting synthesis that or even you would think that you should be able to put in the protein structure of like every molecule and then just have it spit out 1,000 new cancer remedies that fit these different proteins that we just haven't stumbled across yet. But I'm not deep into the medical field, so I don't know, but you don't hear about this happening yet. I'm kind of surprised that something like that hasn't
Chatbot
happened.
is never going to do that.
Sure.
You could engineer another kind of AI system that could handle protein folding and things like that, and people have done that, and that's an area where you could see some kind of...
To me, that feels closer to like code this for me. It's more of a math problem. And so,
no, you're right. I mean, do you want me to tell you real quick my story about why I'm pretty sure that AI is never going to take over?
Please, that's why we're all here.
A super quick story. All right, so the story, those of you who listened to the radio this week will have already heard this story, but those of you who didn't, basically the United States Army invented ChatGPT during World War II. And it did that because it invented the first computer known as ENIAC that was designed in 1943, and it also hired this guy called J.P. Guilford to crack the secret of creativity. At J.P. Guilford, he was a University of Southern California professor. He came up with this theory that all thought was computational, and therefore creativity could be reduced to a computational protocol. He reduced it to two protocols. They are divergent thinking and convergent thinking. Divergent thinking, you've probably heard of it. It's the driver of brainstorming. It means you randomly associate ideas. Convergent thinking is what you do at the end of a brainstorm. You draw a line through all the ideas that seem to be low probability, therefore you kill all the interesting ideas, right? Convergent thinking is basically pattern matching. So J.P. Guilford developed this theory of divergent thinking and convergent thinking. It's the basis of something known as ideation, design thinking, all these things. And at the time, in 1943, the United States Army's computer wasn't powerful enough to run Guilford's two protocols. But the United States Army has since invested a lot of money in computers. And they have some very, very powerful computers sitting in the basement of the Pentagon, which are now running divergent thinking and convergent thinking, which is to say are essentially running ChatGPT. And the reason I tell you this is because the United States Army were the people who contacted me 5 years ago and said, Angus, this computer is pretty dumb. And something else, the more that we encourage humans to use divergent thinking and convergent thinking, the more we have them interact with this, the less good they get in real life. And so what I'm telling you, and again, I understand this is a contentious subject and people will have different views on it, but I am going to predict in the future, and I'd be happy to make a bet with anyone in this room at 1,000,000 to 1 odds, which is to say, I'll give you $1 million if I'm wrong, You only need to give me $1 if you're right, then we're going to hit another AI winner. We're going to hit another AI winner, and this technology, this bubble is going to deflate, and a small number of experts who are able to design specific technologies, specific uses for AI are going to be fine, but all the vibe coding and the asking GPT and the idea that GPT is going to replace therapists and all the rest of it, that's going to be gone. But anyway, that's just what I think. I'm willing to take those 1,000,000 to 1 odds, anybody in this room.
That's great. Before we leave, let's focus a little bit on wrapping this up in like a practical way.
Yeah.
If people want to be better leaders, better parents, better coaches, what do you recommend for them? What's an exercise they can do? What's something practical they can take from what you've learned about primal intelligence?
So the key to leadership is self-reliance, not looking to other people. And we do an exercise that we call covert victory. And this is a special operations exercise. And what it basically means is identifying something good that you did and then not sharing it with other people. Because if you need to share it with other people for you to feel that it's valuable, it's actually their affirmation that you're seeking, as opposed to the thing that you've done. And so start to monitor yourself. Can you do things that you're so proud of that you don't need to share them? Obviously, if someone asks you about them, you don't have to keep them quiet. But you don't need to share them. And what's really great about this exercise is not only does it teach you this sense of emotional autonomy, but it also creates room for everybody else. Because instead of going home and being like, I'm so awesome, let me tell you about all the cool stuff that I did, right? You can instead be that person that allows other people to tell their stories.
I think it makes you more resilient too. If you don't do it for their praise in the first place, it doesn't hurt you as much if you don't get it.
That's exactly right.
You're doing it for its own sake.
You're doing it for the intrinsic value that
Sure.
it has to you and your story.
That's
right.
great.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, everybody. Angus Fletcher.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome.